Well, the Senate is set to consider a bill to create a federally appointed control board with sweeping powers to run Puerto Rico's economy to help the island cope with its crippling debt crisis. The bill, known as Promesa, passed the House last week in a bipartisan vote of 297 to 127. Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez spoke out against the bill.
We're engaged today in a wholly undemocratic activity in the world's greatest democracy. We're debating how we will take power from the people who are virtually powerless already. Think about it. You are imposing a junta, because that's what they're calling it. There will be no difference between this junta and the junta of Pinochet in Chile, as far as the international community is concerned.
But many of Luis Gutierrez's longtime allies in the Congressional Progressive Caucus backed the bill, including New York Congress members Jose Serrano and Nydia Velázquez, as well as Arizona Congressmember Raul Grijalva, who said the bill was needed to address Puerto Rico's humanitarian crisis.
H.R. 5278 is not the bill I would have drafted or the colleagues on my side of the aisle would have drafted. The Oversight Board is too powerful. The board is yet another encroachment on the sovereignty of the people of Puerto Rico, and rightfully so, they find it offensive. So here is the bottom line. Puerto Rico is drowning in debt, and H.R. 5278 is a lifeline. This is the only bill that will attract enough support from my Republican colleagues on that side of the aisle to pass in Congress, a Congress they control. Many of the provisions I oppose are the very provisions that will probably attract Republican support. We have worked for months across the aisle and with the administration, and this is a compromise with the best opportunity to pass. When measured against a perfect bill, this legislation is inadequate. When measured against the worsening humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico, this legislation is necessary.
In the Senate, Robert Menendez, Dick Durbin, and Bernie Sanders have come out against the bill, and any one of them could filibuster the legislation. The debate in the Senate comes as the Supreme Court has issued two major decisions about Puerto Rico. On Monday, in a 5-2 decision, the High Court rejected Puerto Rico's bid to establish its own bankruptcy law that would have let the island's public utilities restructure about $20 billion those entities owe to bondholders. That decision came just days after the Supreme Court ruled against Puerto Rico in a separate case, a ruling regarding the island's sovereignty, its sovereignty rights in criminal cases.
To talk more about these political and judicial developments, we're joined by two guests. From San Juan, Puerto Rico, we're joined by the city's mayor, Carmen Yulín Cruz. And here in New York, we're joined by Natasha Alicia Orabañan, president of the National Lawyers Guild and associate counsel at Latino Justice. Her latest article for the Huffington Post is "The United States makes the case for why Puerto Rico is still its colony." Let's go first to San Juan, to the mayor. Your response to the legislation right now in Congress.
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone and greetings from San Juan, Puerto Rico. You don't add up a democratic situation. You don't put fuel to a fire. And what the Congress has done, what the President of the United States has done, what the judicial system has done, is they have unveiled to everyone, the international community and everyone in Puerto Rico, that we are a colony of the United States. Promesa is a broken promise to the people of Puerto Rico. They have put their backs towards the rights of Puerto Rican people, and they cannot move forward an agenda which will help the development of the Puerto Rican economy. Since 1952, the U.S. has admitted, based on the actions, that it has perpetrated a fraud on the international community when it asked for Puerto Rico to be taken out of the list of colonies. So we are a colony. That being said, what are we going to do in Puerto Rico, and what are the representatives? And I have to thank Luis Gutierrez for standing his ground and standing with the people of Puerto Rico on this. But what cannot happen, and what people need to know, is while in the U.S. people are fighting to increase minimum wage to $15 an hour, this Colonial Control Board will lower minimum wage in Puerto Rico for people 25 or under at $4.25 an hour. This Colonial Control Board could sell our natural resources. And this Colonial Control Board will have sovereign powers to revoke anything that our next governor, our next legislature, or any public official of the Puerto Rican government elected by the democratic vote of the Puerto Rican people will do. So we have no voice because we have been left to be voiceless by those that claim to be the beacon of democracy in all of the world.
And Mayor Julian, I wanted to ask you, this control board has been compared to the D.C. control board that was established when the District of Columbia was in financial problems. But that control board required all the members, that legislation required all the members of the board to be residents of the District of Columbia. And also the federal government came in with financial aid by assuming all the pension liabilities of the District of Columbia. Whereas this legislation doesn't provide any kind of federal assistance, only a control board, 6 of whose 7 members can be from the United States, not from Puerto Rico. Why do you call it a colonial control board?
It's when the power resides in a group of people that have not been elected in another country, that is the definition of a colony. When you cannot even declare bankruptcy and the U.S. negates the right of the Puerto Rican people to produce a piece of legislation that will allow us to orderly declare bankruptcy, that is by definition what a colony is. Now, it's interesting. People may think that this colonial control board allows for a structured of the debt in Puerto Rico. That is not true. The majority of its members now will have to decide based on whatever they want and whatever issues and variables they want to put forth, if not when, if our debt will be restructured. So this is basically a control board done for the hedge funds of the world, for the hedge funds that, in a manner, knowing that Puerto Rico was in a crisis, gave money to the Puerto Rican people. Now, we have our own responsibility on this. We have to reform our government. We have to restructure what our priorities are, and we have to restructure the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. So there is a shared, silent cooperation that went on to produce the perfect crisis. Now, it's also important to note that the Puerto Rican people will have to pay $370 million to this control board for it to be functional. So not only are they taking democracy away from Puerto Rico, but they're also doing the following. It's costing us money to inflict pain on our own people, and that is totally unreasonable. I cannot think of anything more un-American than that.
I wanted to bring Natasha Licia-Ora Banan into the conversation, the president of the National Lawyers Guild and Associate Counsel at Latino Justice Pearl Deaf. In addition to this legislation, PROMESA, the PROMESA Act, you've got 2 U.S. Supreme Court decisions involving Puerto Rico. Explain.
So as you said, I mean, the last week we've had 2 decisions by the Supreme Court that have dealt with the issue of Puerto Rico, but fundamentally deal with the issue that the mayor was talking about, which is the political relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. This is the first time in a very long time, if perhaps ever, that every branch of the federal government has spoken clearly about the political status of Puerto Rico and has exposed the colonial relationship. So you had the decision in what's known as the Sanchez Valle case by the Supreme Court last week. That was an issue of double jeopardy that went up that essentially said that, you can't be charged for the same crime by 2 sovereigns, where the Supreme Court said Puerto Rico has no separate sovereignty. Other than that, ceded to it by the United States Congress, that ultimately the United States Congress is the ultimate source of all authority regarding Puerto Rico. And of course, it doesn't say that it's a colony, but it says that it has no separate sovereignty, it has no separate autonomy, which is the political and legal fiction that had been created in 1952.
Well, Natasha, both of these decisions, I read them both the majority decisions and the dissenting opinions. And I was struck especially by the Breyer dissent in the Sanchez Valle decision, where he really goes into exposing not only the historical relationship, but also the fact that the United States went before the international community and said, hey, in 1952, Congress granted Puerto Rico self-government, and that this, in effect, is now contradicting contradicting what the United States told the international community when the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico was first created.
That's exactly right. I mean, Breyer really looks at a less kind of textualist interpretation and says, let's look at in practice. In practice, Puerto Rico has supposedly implemented some aspects of self-determination, self-governance, autonomy, but it's really the United States' position. And the oral argument, Breyer raised this question as well to the council and said, you know, what is the United States' position before the international community after this case, after you filed a brief in this case, explicitly saying that you don't believe that Puerto Rico has any sovereignty? You know, this Monday is the annual hearing before the UN Decolonization Committee on Puerto Rico, where the United States has consistently said Puerto Rico does not need to be reviewed by this body because it doesn't belong there. It has aspects of autonomy. It has aspects of self-governance and sovereignty. And for the first time, the governor of Puerto Rico will be going before this committee now on Monday, specifically because every branch of government has said Puerto Rico is a colony. You have no governance. And to the international community, the United Nations, has been very clear that colonialism is not welcome in the international community. It is immoral, it is unjust, it is unlawful, and there needs to be a process towards decolonization.
Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz in San Juan, can you respond to the Supreme Court decisions, but also describe the effects of the Puerto Rican debt crisis on the ground, the austerity measures that have been imposed?
Well, two things. First,
it looks like we have her back. We're just having a little trouble.
Can do to start that decolonization process, which should be a self-determination process from the people of Puerto Rico. And
we're having some satellite problems connecting from New York to San Juan. It looks like Mayor Yulín is back again. Go ahead, Mayor Yulín.
Didn't injure anything. So that is an act of good faith that could happen right now, today, and there is no reason and no need to
Sorry,
wait.
we lost you on the satellite. What is the act of goodwill? What is the act of goodwill?
Enough at the municipality to be able to work our finances, where we have gone from a deficit of $104 million when I became mayor to a surplus of $24 million last year, and expected to be a surplus of more than $30 million this year. We've done it without laying off people, and we've done it increasing services. But that has not been the faith of the central government. And of course, when one Puerto Rican suffers, we all suffer. We have had increased number of problems with health reform and health issues. People in the United States should know that we pay the same Medicare tax that you pay, but we get less of the benefits, which again is highly unfair and quietly un-American. Aren't we supposed to all be getting the same for what we pay for, right? So we get less. That means that a lot of the doctors are leaving the island. We have had an exodus of more than 300,000 people in the past 7 years. And of course, that decreases our income basis, which in turn, it's a wheel that goes round and round. People are losing their homes because jobs are leaving. Now, that started with the ending of Section 936 of the IRS Code, where companies could repatriate the earnings that they made in Puerto Rico back into the United States without having to pay federal income tax. Puerto Rico has one of the corporate tax rates that is lowest in the world, just 4%, and it was just recently added. So there's about $32 million that are $32 billion with a B, that are taken away from Puerto Rico every year without these companies paying 1 single cent of taxes and contributing that way to the Puerto Rican economy. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the air ambulance service was shut down because the government had no money to pay. Sometimes there is not enough equipment to conduct the surgeries that are necessary. So it is a crisis that we have seen increasing, and that is putting a lot more strain on the 78 municipalities of Puerto Rico. Some of them, like the larger municipality, which San Juan is, we have been able to weather the storm, but some other smaller municipalities are really hurting and are at the door of having to perhaps not lay off employees, but having to reduce their income. There's one municipality, Ponce, on the lower south end side of the island that has had its employees working half-time because it isn't able to pay for all its payroll. So there is a humanitarian crisis.